Imagine your dad suddenly sits you down at the kitchen table, looks you right in the eye, and says, "We have absolutely no money left." You'd probably look at him completely confused, right? And you might ask, well, can't you just print more money? Now, I want you to imagine an entire country facing that exact same problem. Okay, let's dive right into this. Welcome to this explainer on how a whole nation can actually go bankrupt.
So what if a country runs out of money? You might be thinking, hey, a country makes its own money, so it can literally never run out, right? But can a country actually go broke, just like a regular person? The short answer is absolutely yes. But to understand exactly how that happens, we need to take a quick look at how a country manages its wallet.
Let's imagine a country as one giant family. Just like your parents earn the salary to pay for groceries, rent, and maybe some fun stuff, a government earns its salary through taxes. Basically, every time people buy things or companies make profits, the government collects a little piece of that pie. And it uses this income to pay for massive daily expenses. We're talking roads, hospitals, schools, and literally just keeping the lights on.
But what happens if this giant family spends way more than it actually earns? Let's say they bring in $50,000 a month, but they spend $70,000. To cover that massive difference, they have to borrow. Well, a country does the exact same thing. It borrows from banks, investors, or even other countries. And if they keep spending more than they earn, they just have to keep borrowing, year after year. Over time, this builds up a huge pile of what we call a deficit, which eventually turns into the national debt.
Now, here's a really important point. Borrowing isn't always a bad thing. Think about it. If your parents borrow money to buy a house, that's usually a pretty smart investment. For our giant family, if the government borrows money to build a new highway, a shiny new airport, or a power plant, those things actually help businesses grow. And that eventually helps the country earn even more money later on.
But here's where things get super interesting and, honestly, a little scary. What if the borrowing just never stops? What happens if a country keeps taking out massive loans, but doesn't earn enough from those big investments to actually pay the money back?
Well, eventually the lenders are going to knock on the door and ask for their money. The government checks the national wallet, and it is completely empty. When a country has to officially look at its lenders and say, "I'm so sorry, we literally cannot pay you," that is called a sovereign default. Now, the country hasn't physically disappeared off the map, but its financial reputation? Totally ruined. The trust is just gone.
And to make matters worse, it's almost never just one person they owe money to. A country owes an incredibly complex mix of lenders. We're talking about huge global groups like the IMF and the World Bank, private investors sitting in Wall Street offices, and other nations like China. It's this massive, tangled web of debt.
The breaking point, Sri Lanka, 2022. To see what this actually looks like when the math finally catches up with reality, we're going to look at a real-world example. This is exactly what happens when a country's bank account hits zero.
So how did this absolutely beautiful island nation just run out of money? Well, it started with years of heavy borrowing to build huge infrastructure projects. Then, in 2019, the government made sweeping tax cuts, which is basically like a family purposely slashing its own income. On top of that, a global crisis hit, causing their massive tourism industry to drop off a cliff. Suddenly, the money stopped coming in, but those huge loan payments, they were still due.
The result was absolute devastation for the people living there. As the BBC reported at the time, life has become a long queue for Sri Lankans. Without foreign money, the country couldn't import fuel. The fuel queues were curling around suburbs like gargantuan metal pythons. Tuk-tuk drivers literally had to bring pillows, changes of clothes, and water, sleeping in their vehicles for days just to get a few tiny liters of gas.
You see, the real human cost of a default is heartbreaking. This giant family's budget wasn't just numbers on a spreadsheet anymore. It was daily survival. The country suffered through 13-hour blackouts in sweltering heat. Hospitals completely ran out of life-saving medicines, like antivenom. Fishermen couldn't even take their boats out because there was zero diesel. Families had to band together around wood fires, surviving on just simple rice and coconut sambal.
It got so bad that even basic milk powder vanished from the shelves. The BBC noted that a majority of Sri Lankan children were forced onto a diet with almost no protein. The United Nations actually had to step in and issue warnings about severe malnutrition. When a country goes broke, make no mistake, it's the ordinary people who bear the absolute worst of it.
Now you might be wondering, is this it? Is this the end? Does the country just vanish? No. But how on earth does a broken country get its money back? How do you fix that giant family budget when absolutely no one trusts you enough to lend you another dime?
Honestly, fixing this is incredibly complicated today. In the past, the old way meant a country just sat down with a small group of other lender countries, known as the Paris Club, and they worked out a deal. Easy enough, right? Well, the new way is a massive headache, because countries now owe money to private investors, global banks, and brand new lenders, all with competing interests. Nobody wants to forgive a debt if they think the guy next to them is going to get paid in full instead. So they argue, and these arguments can drag on for years.
And those delays, they are literally deadly. According to a staggering study from the Open Society Foundations, when a country's debt default drags on without being fixed, it costs the nation on average 1.5 years of life expectancy per person. Delays in fixing the giant family's budget quite literally cost lives.
But recovery is possible. To get back on its feet, the country has to take some very painful steps. It's exactly like a real family tightening its belt to pay off a massive credit card bill. First, they usually call the International Monetary Fund, or IMF, for emergency funding. Then, the government has to slash unnecessary spending, increase taxes to bring in more income, and slowly, painfully, renegotiate with everyone they owe money to. It takes years of hard work to rebuild that trust.
Because at the end of the day, an entire nation's economy operates on the exact same basic math as your family's budget. Money comes in, money goes out. If more money keeps going out than coming in for a very long time, disaster strikes.
Which brings us to our final question. We live in a deeply connected world, and many nations are borrowing more heavily than ever before. Will the world learn to balance the giant family budget before the next wallet runs dry? Thank you so much for joining me in this explainer. Keep questioning, keep learning, and I will see you next time.